Yeah, 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 yeah.
I found it on Rhema Radio.
Hi friends! This week's midweek service sermon was from Pastor Hua Seng Tiong at SSMC, entitled Done Just As the Lord Commanded. Look out for that. And now for this week's interview.
Welcome to Rhema Radio, the weekly podcast on faith, culture, music and more. I'm Doreen Tang, and today Dr. Hera Lukman, a chartered health psychologist and the head of Psychology and Learning Centre at Methodist College, Kuala Lumpur, is in the studio with us to discuss the issues surrounding mental illness. A very serious topic indeed. Welcome, Dr. Lukman.
Hi, Doreen.
Okay, just to start us off, I want to get straight into the topic because there's so many things to discuss about mental illness. We feel that it is a subject that is poorly understood, perhaps, especially in our community today. How would you define mental illness?
Yeah, mental illness is a diagnosable health condition. That is, someone has a mental illness if he or she has certain symptoms that are associated with a particular mental condition. For example, someone who is diagnosed with a bipolar condition has a mental illness, or someone who is diagnosed as having an anxiety disorder has a mental illness, just like someone who is diagnosed with diabetes has a physical or medical condition. So it's a diagnosable health condition. I think it's important to differentiate mental illness or mental disorders from the term mental ill health. Mental ill health refers more to a state of one's well-being. So if we look at what the World Health Organization and how it defines mental health, it defines mental health as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to her or his community. So in this definition, mental health is not defined as a state of absence of any mental illness or mental disorders. So what it means is that people without a diagnosed mental illness can experience poor mental health. And those diagnosed with mental illness can realize his or her potential, cope with stress, work productively, in other words, live life well, despite having a condition, despite having a mental illness.
I see. Okay, so it seems like, when we talk about mental illnesses, it encompasses a very broad spectrum of possible illnesses. What are some of the more common types of these, not the mental health, but mental illnesses that we see?
Yeah, there are many mental illnesses that perhaps the listeners are familiar with. But according to WHO, the World Health Organization again, they have classified two groups of disorders as common mental disorders. They are depressive disorders and anxiety disorders. They are common because many people have one or both kinds of disorders in this world. The global number or the global prevalence for depressive disorders and anxiety disorders are estimated to be 4.4% of the population. And if you look at 4.4% of the world population, you're looking at approximately 322 million people who have depressive disorders. And then you're also looking at 3.6% of the world's population, equating to around 264 million people suffering from anxiety disorders. So that's a huge number. So some experts argue, though, that these numbers are likely an underestimation of actual figures, given the fact that people are rather reserved in disclosing that they have any form of mental illness, because mental illness is associated with severe stigma. Right. So we're probably looking at a much higher number. With respect to Malaysia, WHO has also done some studies looking at the number of people in Malaysia suffering from depressive disorders and anxiety disorders, and the figures are roughly similar So we have about 3.8% of the Malaysian population suffering from depressive disorders and 4.9% of the population suffering from anxiety disorders. So that again, we're looking at really hundreds of thousands or more into the million, over a million in Malaysia. Yeah, so the problem with mental illness is as severe when you look at Malaysia compared to the global figures. But regardless of which country, I think it's important to note that depressive and anxiety disorders are more prevalent among females than males.
All right. Thanks for mentioning the word stigma just now, because that's actually leading up to my next question. Many coping with mental illness today say that other people's prejudices regarding these conditions can be almost as bad as the illness themselves. And, I just want to make reference here to the Journal of Health and Social Behavior. They found that about 58% of those sampled do not want people with mental illnesses in their workplaces. Your thoughts on this?
Yes, I think there are many reasons why organizations or companies, may be reluctant to employ someone with a known existing mental illness. I think I can understand that because organizations may assume that employees with mental health challenges are not as productive in their work, might be more difficult to manage with respect to interpersonal matters, for example, and may take more sick leave, which is certainly not what organizations are looking for in employees. Given such assumptions, it's not so hard to understand why many organizations are reluctant to bear the costs of employing and or retaining employees with mental health challenges. While I empathize with the need to protect the interests of the employing organizations, I think we must consider two important facts. Fact number one is that many people with mental illness are productive and successful individuals. Let's look at, from people from let's say people who are celebrities to start with. I'm sure everybody knows Robin Williams.
Oh, yeah, I do.
Yeah, right. And Catherine Zeta-Jones, right? Charlize Theron.
Big names.
Big names, right?
A-listers.
That's right. Even Adele, I love her music.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right? And she came forth and shared her experience with anxiety conditions, right? And that's just celebrity. We also know individuals who are prominent individuals in their respective field of work. For example, J.K. Rowling's. Yeah, we read a lot of her books.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, J.K. Rowling's struggles with depression.
Okay.
And John Nash, and those of us in the scientific community, he struggles with schizophrenia. And everybody seems to know or familiar with Winston Churchill. The ex-Prime Minister of UK, he suffers from depression. And then to perhaps, to our listeners, there are many faith giants who also struggle with mental illness. I think one of the persons who's very, very famous, preacher Charles Spurgeon, I think a lot of us may be familiar with this person. He struggles with depression.
Right.
And I'm sure, with the listeners, all of us may have a few people that we know personally who has mental illness, but are as productive or more productive, than others who don't have a diagnosed mental illness. So I guess what I'm saying is that fact number one, many people with mental illness are as productive and successful as other people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we're just going to go for a short break now, and we'll be right back.
Have you ever seen a homeless person sleeping by the roadside and your heart was just moved to do something to be a blessing to him or her and see that person's life changed? Well, you have the opportunity to do that now. Hope Street Ministry is all about reaching out to the homeless people here in the center of KL. If you'd like to do more and be a blessing to them, contact us at www.1vm.net.
If anyone needs some resources on family life and family relationships, do visit us at our website www.family.org.my.
Welcome back. We are with Dr. Hera Lukman, and we were in the midst of discussing mental illnesses. Dr. Lukman, you were telling me about the stigma faced by those who are suffering from mental illnesses. Do continue.
Yes, as I was saying, that we have to be mindful of two facts when we want to make conclusions or evaluation of how productive individuals with mental illness would be. So I was talking about fact one. Many people with mental illness are productive and successful individuals despite having a mental condition. Let's go to fact number two. I think we have to bear in mind that although mental illness is related to mental well-being, they are not the same thing. While it is true that having a mental illness can negatively affect our mental health, and if our negative mental health is not addressed, we may develop a diagnosable mental illness. It is not true that someone with mental illness cannot have mental health. If mental illness is well managed, one can certainly have a good mental health despite living with a mental illness. Conversely, we know people who are not diagnosed with mental illness who experience poor mental health, i.e. finding it hard to cope with life. So I think we have to be careful here when we evaluate the productivity of an individual diagnosed as having mental illness.
Okay, a lot to chew on there. But let's move on to the next question. Let's talk about spiritual development. Okay, I'm going to reference a study again. In the study of acute mental illness and Christian faith by Lifeway Research in 2014, roughly 3 out of 4 pastors and individuals with acute mental illnesses agree that a Christian with mental illness can thrive spiritually, regardless of whether or not the illness has been stabilized. And I know you answered that to some degree in a previous question, but let's talk about it in the context of spiritual development. Do you think that mental illness can affect a person's spiritual life?
I think this is a very good question, and a question that, that I think every one of us need to really think through. I think living with a mental illness can have a profound negative as well as positive impact on one's spiritual life. If what you mean by spiritual life is one's understanding of who God is and one's understanding of who we are with respect to God. In my view, living with mental illness can force or compel us to examine major existential issues such as our purpose in life, our value and significance, and also how we understand inevitable experiences in life such as loneliness, suffering, and the mysteries of life. Such contemplation can in turn make an individual wrestle with making sense of his or her experience with mental illness as a Christian. For example, questions such as, why me? If God is good, why am I suffering? Right? I mean, can God still use me when I'm so messed up? I mean, you can understand that these questions would make someone really dejected with life, isn't it? So this is the bit that mental illness can have a very negative impact on one's spiritual life. But questions such as these can place someone in a spiritual desert, yes, wrestling with God, but it could also bring about something very positive. And if I may draw some parallel with Jacob's wrestling with God, this biblical passage that we can find in Genesis chapter 32 gives me a glimpse of the ever compassionate and loving God who allows his children to wrestle with him during times of great distress. And this includes, in my view, mental illness. At the end of this wrestling, we notice that God gave Jacob a new identity. And I see this new identity as something that no one and nothing, including the presence of mental illness, can take away. So therefore, while mental illness can be thorny for our spiritual life, it can also produce great insights that we will not otherwise have about God, ourselves, and life. So I wouldn't be so quick in concluding that mental illness is all bad in that sense.
Right.
God has other plans that we don't know of.
Oh, wow. Again, a lot to chew upon. But let's move on. I so want to rewind, but time doesn't permit. Let's get personal here. We often say that churches should minister to those who are marginalized, in need, or broken in spirit. In light of this, I think that we have a responsibility to show support to those with mental illness. But how do we do this?
Oh, wow. That's a huge question. But I think due to time, I'll talk about two. The first thing that I think we can do is that we must refrain from seeing people as something we can fix. We must do less fixing and more listening. Less talking, more listening. Among many things, good listening provides a sense of we-ness. It provides a community for those in need. It reduces loneliness and help the person process his or her own thoughts as they listen to themselves. The second thing is that we can do is to keep in mind that there are many, many things we don't know about mental illness. Mental illness is very complex, Doreen, and cannot be explained just by looking at one thing. For example, bad relationship with parents. Okay, a common example that I often observe in Christian communities, if I may share an example, is the spiritualization of mental illness. You suffer from depression because you have unforgiveness as the root cause of your depression. This is something, this is something that I often hear as a personal encounter. While I concur that this might have contributed to the development of depression in an individual, this is certainly not the only reason for one's depression. So such comments is not only presumptuous, it is inaccurate and places the blame on the person with depression. Sure. So therefore, such comments can become more of a burden than a relief. So if we want to walk alongside someone living with mental illness, we must not provide false or inaccurate counsel. I think the best thing or the more useful thing is to say that you don't know what causes their depression or their mental illness. I think I'd rather say I don't know than to provide a simplistic justification for something as complex as mental illness.
We're going to go for a short break and be right back after this.
Rhema Radio.
Hi, I'm Pastor Elisha Satpinder from New Covenant Community Sentul and Dignity for Children Foundation in Sentul as well. I want to invite you to come and participate in amazing work that God is doing in transforming lives, especially the marginalized, from preschool right up till Form 5, IGCSE, and different expressions of vocational through the cafes, things like Project B, urban gardens, various things that we are doing. If you will go to our website, www.dignityforchildren.org, get more information, give us a call, and make a difference in a child that will transform the city for us. God bless you.
Rhema Radio.
Welcome back. We're with Dr. Hera Lukman, and we are in the midst of discussing mental illnesses.
Doreen, if I may, I have one more point to add about caring for those with mental illness. Yeah, I think many people are very, I'm very motivated to help others who are in need. And I just want to make a note on one very important thing, that all of us need to be aware that being sincere and caring are often not enough for those in need of help and support, because we can be sincerely ineffective in our comfort and care, right? So what is actually needed more than just caring is effective caring. Effective caring requires us to understand as best as we can about mental illness and mental health, and to be honest with ourselves about our role and limitations in helping. I think this is a very important point.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, let's talk about helping. We all know there's medical and professional intervention. According to the Lifeway research that I referenced previously, 85% of individuals who have been prescribed medication for mental illnesses believe that medication has been effective. And 79% of individuals who have received psychological therapy believe it has been effective for them. These are pretty convincing numbers, definitely more than 50% is pretty convincing. Why then do we see reluctance in the general population in seeking treatment for mental illnesses?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There's a mismatch, isn't it, about, our understanding of treatment and our willingness to seek treatment, especially in a Christian community. Yeah. So in my opinion, this may be due to common assumptions that we have as Christians. And one of the common assumption is that to be a good Christian, we must have a good testimony for God or a life blessed by God. And good testimony and blessed life should not include things like failures, defeats, ill health, anything negative. So such theological perspective not only lacks validity, it can create a severe sense of shame, rejection, disillusionment, and perhaps alienation among Christians who find their lives falling short of being exemplary or blessed. So therefore, seeking treatment is an admission that something is wrong with us. Right. And this is no, right? In a lot of cases, and hence we can be labeled as not blessed, not a good testimony for Christ. So therefore, seeking treatment can be associated with shame and guilt of not being a good and faithful Christian. Shame can stop people who need medical treatment to seek help. I think reluctance to seek treatment could also be due to the belief that mental illness is a spiritual condition per se. Those who has such a perspective tends to over-spiritualize mental illness, for example, using spiritual explanations to make sense of mental illness and using spiritual discipline, such as prayer, fasting, reading the Bible, as the sole treatment of mental illness. Seeking treatment outside the church or Christian communities, therefore, could be perceived as lacking in faith and trust in receiving healing from God. So I think I empathize with these point of views and these perspectives. I think those of us who subscribe to these perspectives are not strictly wrong, but just that these perspectives are limited to one angle of looking at mental illness. It's like looking at a sculpture from one angle. It is not the whole picture, and certainly doesn't help us appreciate the full sculpture, isn't it? So mental illness are complex human phenomenon. Humans are not merely spiritual beings. We are also biological, psychological, and social beings. While spiritual issues can contribute to the development and maintenance of mental illness, spiritual factors are not the sole cause of mental illnesses, and therefore cannot be the only solution for mental illnesses. So in my view, the church must avoid making simplistic conclusions regarding what causes and what can eliminate a person's mental illness, because a wrong assumption can have a devastating implications for the welfare of the sufferers, the very people that we're trying to help.
Last question, Dr. Lukman, let's talk about diagnosis and treatment. What are some practical action steps that somebody can take, a listener can take, if they want to seek treatment for any mental illness or simply just be evaluated and have someone to talk to?
Yeah, I think it's really important not to suffer in silence and not to do self-diagnosis because,
it's so tempting, right?
Yeah, it's so tempting because of the stigmatization of mental illness. So a lot of people deal with symptoms on their own, for the fear of being stigmatized and being judged. So I think that, it's important to know that there are people out there that you can speak to. There are a lot of people who are concerned about you and who love you and who want to walk alongside you. So talk to somebody who you really trust, share about how you feel and how you've been coping with things and what make you think, that something is not quite right.
So somebody that you trust, somebody that you
trust. That's right, I think that is the first thing that you could do. The second thing, if you can, is to talk to a health professional. And there are many health professionals that you could see, and there are many choices. You could either see your general physician, the doctor that you usually see for all physical matters, or you can approach a psychologist, right? A psychologist holds training or have training in clinical psychologist, yes. Just to talk through with them and see, what is the next step. or you can see a psychiatrist who's a medical doctor specializing in psychological conditions. So there are many avenues that you can talk about your concerns with. But I think that, the people that you're going to talk to, those that you trust, it's also quite good for you to tell them that, if you need them to be with you, to go with you to see a certain professional, I think that, those people that you share with will be more than happy to accompany you. So I think these are a few things that you could think about. But lastly, I think we live in an internet world right now, and there are many, many good websites that you can access to understand a little bit more what you're going through.
Thank you for your insight. Now, to end, I'd like to quote an article that I came across on relevantmagazine.com, and this article is written by Aaron Loy, and it's titled Confessions of a Depressed Pastor. So he was a pastor who went through depression. And, among of what he says, I like this. As Christians, let's commit to approach mental health issues with an extra measure of grace and humility as we seek to love and learn together. Unquote. And because, this is an area clearly that we know very little about. But I do thank you, Dr. Hera Lukman, for sharing your opinions and insights on mental illness. May God prosper your work in academia and your efforts to spread awareness and understanding on all things related to human psychology. This has been Doreen Tang signing off at Rhema Radio.
Syukur untuk setiap rencanamu dan rancanganmu yang mulia. Dalam satu tubuh kami bersatu menjadi duta kerajaanmu. Ku ucapkan berkat atas Malaysia, biar kemuliaan Tuhan akan nyata. Bagi bangsa ini kami berdiri dan membawa doa kami kepadamu. Sesuatu yang besar pasti terjadi dan mengubahkan negeri kami. Hanya namamu Tuhan ditinggikan atas seluruh bumi.
Kami rindu melihat Malaysia pulih dari semua problema, hidup dalam jalan kebenaran-Mu, pancarkan terang kemuliaan-Mu.
Ku ucapkan berkat atas Malaysia, biar kemuliaan Tuhan akan nyata. Bagi bangsa ini kami berdiri dan membawa doa kami kepadamu. Sesuatu yang besar pasti terjadi dan mengubahkan negeri kami. Hanya namamu Tuhan ditinggikan atas seluruh bumi. ucapkan berkat atas Malaysia, biar kemuliaan Tuhan akan nyata. Ku ucapkan berkat atas Malaysia, biar kemuliaan Tuhan akan nyata. Bagi bangsa ini kami berdiri dan membawa doa kami kepadamu. Sesuatu yang besar pasti terjadi dan mengubahkan negeri kami. Hanya nama-Mu Tuhan ditinggikan atas seluruh bumi.
This segment features music from Sound Alive. This episode was edited and mixed by Veronica Ng and recorded by Moses Chan at Rodeo Studio. Do connect with us at facebook.com/Rhema RAD.10. Comment, like, and share our weekly show so we can do more. Tune in next week for the next midweek service and interview. Till then, God bless.
I found it on Rhema Radio.